Keep going.
Okay?
Yep.
So what I was about to say is, when you're trying to balance these different considerations, you want to keep faith with these basic goals of consumer sovereignty, maximizing availability, good price products, with acceptable standards of social behavior, meaning you treat your workers decently, you treat all your stakeholders decently. Then always comes an issue. Walmart has stockholders, so it's trying to maximize profits. So people will buy its stock and give it capital. But most stockholders these days would agree that companies have to maintain a certain standard for their workers, their suppliers, as well as their consumers. So you're always in a balancing act, and in economics, there are always two sides to an issue. Like some of your questions, are Walmart's low wages an economic issue or an economic gain? Well, the answer is both. The answer is both. Does Walmart poison or cure local small business? Well, both. In the case of small business, it supports a lot of small businesses that it uses as suppliers. But at the same time, because it's bigger, volume, all that, it will drive some mom and pop retail shops out of business. Now you say, is that fair or is it unfair? Well, different societies have different standards. I mean, there are countries, as you know, in Europe, in particular, France, others, who put protections in place so that mom and pop grocery stores won't go out of business.
Yeah.
In the U.S., which is more kind of unbridled capitalism, say, well, if Walmart can come in and have lower prices and better products, tough, but that's the way the cookie crumbles, and so people who can't compete with that go out of business. And you and I may say, we used to like to go down to the local butcher, we don't have him anymore. Well, you take that as a price you pay for the advantages. So it's always a trade-off. There are very few absolute answers to questions like that. It depends where you put your greater weight, whether it's on the consumer benefits or on the intangible, but not unimportant benefits of having a friendly local retailer or grocery store or butcher or whatever it may be. As I say, different societies reach different answers on how to handle that trade-off. Usually through, well, certainly here, through democratic systems and through elections and voting and putting people in office that make decisions about that. Now, one thing you always have to do, though, to make sure that you maintain this competitive pricing, you have to avoid monopolies. You have to avoid letting anybody have too much market power. Now, we think of that more on the production side, one big auto company, one big computer company, but it's true on the retail or wholesale trade side too. If you just had, if Walmart was so powerful that it could dictate prices of a given product, then you say, wow, then that's dangerous because then they could jack them up and that would hurt consumers, not help them. So one protection that you have to maintain in place for all of the economy, but including for retail like this, is good antitrust policy, competition policy that makes sure that it remains a competitive business and no player gets big enough or dominant enough in a region or a product, let alone the whole economy, to be able to violate the basic rules of the marketplace that competition is going to drive
Standards.
prices down.
Minimum wage.
Well, see, that's an issue. The minimum wage is not very high.
Well, yeah, it's not.
So then comes the question, what ought to be the minimum? A, should there be a minimum wage? Some people say no, shouldn't be any. Let the market determine wages. Others say not only should have a minimum wage, it should be a living wage, high enough set to be providing reasonable income. And so then, that's a constant debate, very common right now in the country. A lot of states have their own minimum wages. Some localities have minimum wages, and the record is kind of mixed as to what the effect of that is.
Well, speaking of the minimum wage, I think that the people who are not trying to support the minimum wage raise is the people who, let's say, have right now the 10.50 or the $11 an hour, because they say, okay, if this is gonna become just approximate the $10, right? This is gonna become a minimum wage. Are we gonna get a raise for what we're doing at this point?
Right.
Are we gonna have the $3 or whatever the
Right.
the average
Right.
gonna be put up there,
Sure.
if we are gonna be, getting a higher pay for what we're doing to this point right now, for those who have that minimum wage is what is it, 775, 725, 750, yeah, something like that. So I mean it's a big concern for people, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
But minimum wage cannot be, at 750, let's say, when a good gallon of milk almost costs $4 at this point.
Right.
Because you have to work almost an hour for a gallon of milk.
Right.
So.
And then the other fundamental question, though, is whether a minimum wage or higher minimum wage may lead to a loss of jobs.
That's true.
The higher you price labor, the less companies are going to be able to afford it or be willing to hire people.
Right.
So there was actually a recent study on that by the Congressional Budget Office. You may have seen that. And it said, and that's been quoted by the Republicans a lot, that putting the minimum wage at $10.50 would lose 500,000 jobs. Would actually cost 500,000 jobs. Now, again, but there's always pro and con. On the good side, it would raise incomes from people now making $7, and assuming they kept their job, most of them would keep their job, push their incomes up so they'd be able to spend more, be good for the economy. On the other hand, jobs would be lost. So it's a trade-off, and it depends where you're valued. Because at the end of the day, these things always come down to value judgments.
That's true.
Is it worth losing 500,000 jobs for the millions of people now making 7 to go to 10, and maybe you should say those making 10 to go up, maybe not a full 3, but maybe to 12 or something. Likewise, on the social standards, if you put in, this goes back to the early days, but you put in maximum work week, requirements on overtime pay, stuff like that, which still comes up, it will benefit the individual workers that get it, but again, it may lose employment and it may push prices up.
Yeah.
Because then the company has higher labor costs.
Well, I never thought about this approach of that minimum wage, but like I thought if right now 2 working parents is unable basically to maintain a household of 5 people in the house, if let's say one of them is gonna get the raise and the other, I'm not saying it's gonna lose a job right away, but let's say it's gonna cut somewhere their time, they might not need as much childcare, for example, right? They're gonna be able to spend more time with their kids. So it's like there's no really a right answer to
exactly.
that question. So somebody's gonna always get hurt. Somebody's always gonna benefit in whatever movement we're gonna do towards the minimum wage, which it's pretty much what we're dealing with.
That's right.
So I don't know, we're gonna keep doing the Walmart thing.
Yeah.
All right.
So why don't you tell me what questions you want to emphasize about Walmart?
Well, let's see. I mean, you kind of approach that. I mean, answer the question of Walmart as a business model. I could get something out of this. As an ethical and fair business. Could you tell me more about that? If it's Walmart is ethical and a fair business.
Well, again, it comes down to value judgments. If you're looking at a business model that aims to maximize 2 things, consumer benefits, and with that, the profits of the company, then you'd have to say they've got a pretty effective business model. Is it ethical and fair? Well, it's an effective business model. They do well both by themselves, both for themselves, their profits, and their shareholders, therefore, which is important, and also for their customers who love them. most customers love them, right?
Yeah.
So then the question is, when you say are they ethical and fair, what that would usually mean is are they operating legally and within the confines of the society where they're operating, and that'll be very different here, China, European countries.
Because everywhere are different standards.
Different standards everywhere. What the most of the companies would really love would be global standards that they could then fulfill. But of course, that's impossible because countries are so different, standards of living are so different, and these trade-offs are so different. Like in poor, as you know, in poor countries with very high unemployment, and it still includes China, they're going to put the priority on creating jobs, even if they're low-wage jobs, even if they have lousy working conditions, but they're still going to say, hey, those are jobs, and otherwise these guys are out in the boonies and they're still peasants in poverty. And over the last 30 years, China has moved 500 million people, from poverty in the rural area to a much higher standard of living in the urban areas, including producing things for Walmart, even though we would say that much of their working conditions are still abysmal by our standards. But they wanted it. It wasn't as if the government imposed it on them. It was that they wanted it. They migrated, across half a country in order to get that. So they love working for Walmart. Now, as you get more prosperous, you move up the ladder, then your tastes begin to change, and where you come out on those trade-offs change. Say, well, instead of having an extra dollar, or instead of they're creating another million jobs, I'd now rather have higher wages, better working conditions. And at some point, the Chinese government, Bangladesh government, will make that change, like we have in the past. Although it's interesting how paradoxically now, where we have high unemployment, a lot of unemployed people, some shifting back in our own political thinking as a result of that.
Yeah. All right. The next one would be, does Walmart uphold the undermine democracy as a business practice?
Well, it really goes to what I said before. If you put a heavy weight on consumer sovereignty as a key element in democracy, then you can say Walmart is not only upholding it, but it's really promoting it by making more goods available at better prices. And that's kind of a fundamental aspect of democracy. Then on the other side, of course, is the Walmart producers, both the workers and the suppliers, and you say, are they giving them full rights? And then you come to questions like the minimum wage and unions. Yeah. Then you come to the question of unionization, which Walmart hates.
Well, I was about to say
they don't want unions. They don't want unions.
They do not.
And so then that's a big, big issue of whether you think that workers ought to have the right of association, collective bargaining, all that in a given firm. I happen to think yes, because you need sort of equal weight on both sides of the negotiating table.
Some kind of structure there on both sides.
Right. Now, the answer from the businesses that don't like unions, like Walmart, like a lot of others, is that the unions do two things that hurt their business. They push wages up, and they insist on labor practices that reduce the flexibility of the management in using the workers efficiently. Now, in the European countries, a lot of them have gone overboard in that direction.
Yeah.
And you can't fire anybody. If you can't fire anybody, it turns out you won't hire anybody. And one reason that unemployment is so high in Spain, Italy, Greece, is that the labor, and even Germany, although it's not as high, that the labor laws are so rigid and so defensive of the individual worker that the firms have every incentive not to hire, and in fact to automate and use capital-intensive production techniques rather than labor-intensive. So what protects, and this is a famous concept called insiders versus outsiders. Labor laws that protect the insiders who already have the jobs really hurt the outsiders who are looking to get jobs, particularly young people, and that's why there's such high youth unemployment in Europe.
Yeah, that's true.
This 55-year-old Italian worker is very protected against getting fired, as a result of which the Italian firm won't hire the 25-year-old who would like to get a job. And so, again, it's a trade-off. They're winners and losers, and you have to make decisions. You should make decisions in what's in the interest of the overall economy. Pretty wide consensus that in Europe, the worker protections have gone too far. Now, bring that back to Walmart here, the U.S. Walmart and others say, we don't want to go the way of Europe, and wind up in that same boat. Now, to which the answer, of course, is there's a lot of things you can do to protect workers' rights and labor standards without going as far as European countries that have rigidified their labor forces and all that. But that's really the issue as to where you come on this is a continuum, a spectrum between, on the one hand, just having no labor protections and letting the market dictate, which nobody would want, and on the other hand, having these kind of comprehensive protections for workers that really do lead to a rigid and stultified working environment, which actually hurts employment and hurts the economy. So you try to find somewhere along that continuum the optimum. And it'll differ from country to country. It'll probably different periods of time, and nobody can say for sure where it is anyway, even analytically. But that's the political battle. And so the battle over Walmart is, where is it on that continuum, and where should it be, and is there a difference? And then people with different value judgments will come out to different answers. So, like you said, there's no absolute answer. It's a matter of judgment and values, really, as to where you put it. And in general, the wealthier the country, the more it can afford to have higher labor standards, minimum wages, stuff like that, protections for unemployed. And the poorer it is, the less it's going to emphasize those in the interest of getting jobs, any jobs. There are people out of peasantry and into the modern economy and take advantage of globalization.
Yeah. That makes sense. Another question would be, we talk a little bit about, the small businesses getting away. While talking about it with my colleagues, we approach the mom pops kind of businesses, not the little corporations that actually do work with Walmart and put their product there. Do you think that the mom pops businesses are able? Is there any way for them both to work together, Walmart and the small businesses? Somehow to find some kind of connection there that they could both actually make
Well, I guess I don't know enough details about Walmart to know that. What the mom and pops would have to find is niches where they could still provide a product or a service that is not sufficiently large to attract the interest of Walmart. I mean, Walmart's not going to go into every food item, food variant, or service. Some of them just are not big enough to attract their attention. Walmart's all about scale, so for them to take on a business line, there's got to be enough scale to make it profitable. Yeah. And so if the moms and pops can find niches that are too small for Walmart, basically, and other chains, then they can keep their place and their business. And you find it, you get, I don't know why it is, but when you have to get clothes tailored, you still have to go pretty much to mom and pops or little individual
stores,
person operations.
Shoes repairs and places like that.
Big firms don't seem to do that very much. In food, it would be specialty items, specialty kinds of foods, or especially products that are just too small, but have enough profit in them that a mom and pop can keep going.
Hmm.
So it's not. I don't think it rules out mom and pops, but it narrows the scope of what they can do.
Okay. Um, I would maybe we can post number 12, which we kind of touched it there, but 12 and 13 together. Um, I don't know how you aware of that, or if you're aware of that, of the conditions that Walmart provides for coworkers, for workers, I'm sorry, overseas, and how does affect the market in China. Because from our perspective, as what the research we have done, the conditions are not so good. That's what we've been told. That's the videos we saw and articles we read about, and knowing that United States have this big kind of debt in China, right? Um, and knowing that we still are pushing on giving them the jobs and kind of putting ourselves in a bigger hole than we really are, does Walmart somehow is able to help us out to get out from that hole as such a big empire, such a huge company, in a sense, or if it's basically working backwards, putting us in a bigger hole in China.
Well, again, it's a trade-off. As I said before, American consumers love those low-cost Chinese products that Walmart generates over there and brings to them.
Yeah.
That holds down inflation here. That makes incomes go farther here. And back to my consumer sovereignty point, it makes the standards of living of lots of Americans better. So that's the good side. Now, the other side, you say, well, but that's costing us jobs that otherwise we could be producing at home, and then we'd have more people working, and they'd have higher incomes. Most of the studies show that that's probably not. It's true only to a limited extent, because Walmart is the epitome of globalization, and it accelerates the pace at which production goes offshore and comes back here in the form of cheaper goods. But it's hard to believe that Walmart is actually generating new foreign production that could still be done economically here at home.
I see.
Because if Walmart didn't do it, some German or French or Japanese or eventually Chinese company itself would probably do it. And if China didn't do it, some lower cost country, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, would do it. It might be slower. Walmart, and that's what a market leader is all about, and Walmart's a market leader. What they do is stay ahead of the curve. They move faster than other companies. And they line up these supply chains, and then they get the cheaper T-shirts and whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Almost certainly, if what we call comparative advantage is shifting from the U.S. to other countries in general, it would happen anyway. It might happen a little slower, which would mean that the American consumers wouldn't get their benefits as fast. Then the American workers might not lose their jobs as fast, but it probably would happen anyway. It would eventually happen anyway. So what a Walmart does is accelerate the pace of change, and that requires faster adjustment on the part of the U.S. labor force, U.S. companies who are trying to compete from within the United States.
Thank you. Well, we talk about the prices. Let's see. Well, I didn't really want to ask that, but I will ask: would you shop at Walmart?
Yeah, sure. I would not. If I thought they were violating laws
Mm-hmm.
here or abroad, I would have second thoughts. You said rightly, there's criticism of Walmart's labor practices overseas, but it's not clear that they're violating laws overseas either.
Well, yeah.
You may have evidence, but we don't like their labor practices. But as long as they're conforming to the laws of the countries where they operate, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, they have to comply with local laws. As long as they're doing that, it's hard to blame them. Now, you can blame the government of China. You say, and the U.S. does. The U.S. tries to negotiate, whenever we have trade negotiations with these countries, negotiate trade agreements, whatever, we're always pressing them to strengthen their labor standards and put tougher requirements on Walmart and others. But if there's a blame, it's probably not so much on Walmart or the companies as it is on the governments of the countries where they operate for not protecting their own workers. Now, there's always room for interpretation, and if Walmart cutting it too close. A lot of companies have signed these voluntary standard-setting agreements, and certainly Walmart ought to do that. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But when there was this big fire in Bangladesh, workers, died because of terrible labor practices, and so a lot of the companies have signed voluntary agreements to insist on higher standards in the places where they work, and essentially go beyond what their host governments require.
I see.
And it's good, and I would advocate
That
Walmart
support,
doing
yeah.
that. I would advocate Walmart doing that with its market power. It can have influence, but a lot of the companies, the Gap, and a lot of these companies have taken initiatives to go above and beyond what the local governments require, and that's good, and that helps push the local governments in constructive directions.
Okay, thank you. Another one, we touch upon the unions, and that'll be number 18. If Walmart decides to collaborate with unions, smaller communities, and trying to be seen more as a positive business model for a wider range of society, with what biggest challenges are they facing?
Well, the reason they don't like unions, I said, really two things, is unions would demand higher wages and better working conditions, both of which Walmart would say pushes up our costs, and so now we can't bring as good prices to our consumers. So if we do that and agree to what the unions want, it'll hurt our business model, our customer base, and all that. So the challenge they would face if that happened, they would then try to maintain their appeal to their customer base, even though they would have to pay somewhat higher prices and maybe be a little less flexible in shifting their production around to take advantage of lower prices. Because what Walmart, the advantage to them of globalization is they can shift their sourcing around. They can buy from China today and Cambodia tomorrow and Bangladesh next week if the prices or quality of the textiles or whatever they're buying shift, as they frequently do, because the companies that make that stuff are moving all the time to try to get better economic payoff for themselves. So it would reduce somewhat their flexibility, all of which says their prices would go up some. They would lose some of their current first mover advantages in being able to shift around very rapidly and flexibly. And they'd have to try to maintain their consumer base, losing a little bit of that advantage. My guess is they could do it. I don't think it would be a killer for them to unionize, but they're doing well with their current model, and so they want to keep it.
Which makes sense for them, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Why would I want to change that?
Remember, we say who's them? It's their management, but it's also their shareholders.
Yes.
So remember, and again, in our system, we put a lot of weight on shareholders. And there's always a big debate, shareholders versus stakeholders. And what's better for some stakeholders, like workers, like suppliers, may reduce profits and therefore not be good for shareholders. So then, for any company, the question is, who are we trying to satisfy? Well, Walmart would say both our shareholders through profits and our consumers through low price, wide variety of goods. Mm-hmm. And the question is then what happens to those people in the middle, the other stakeholders, the workers, the suppliers, stuff like that.
Oh, but it seems like the Walton family, they still have over 50% of shares,
Yeah.
so
Oh, sure.
they
Oh, sure.
still
Sure.
they're the main
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt.
source there, yeah, that they're
Dominating.
getting.
Yeah.
Yeah. The last one here will be based on what we are able to read about you. We are aware that you're very familiar with globalization. Do you think that Walmart could become one day the icon of
Well, in
globalization?
a way, it is now. In a way, it is now.
Mm-hmm.
At least in the retail business, they are by far the most prominent exploiter of globalization for the reasons I said. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they're able to
Yeah.
move fast. They can buy their T-shirts here today and there tomorrow and somewhere else in a week. All of which, as they would put it, is to maintain their supply of the most attractive uh, products for their consumers, attractive both in terms of quality and price. There's a trade-off there too. But in a way, they are, because they've got a mixed image. Icon is not always the right word, but they are certainly the prototype of, or one of the prototypes of globalization, certainly in the retail trade business, just by virtue of their size and their reach around the world.
I mean, they're trying to go worldwide. I mean, they have already places in overseas. I think they tried in England, and England pushed them out. So they, I don't know the name exactly. There's a different name,
Mm.
different store, but it's based on Walmart, and whoever has the shares,
Mm.
they're the Walmart people.
Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure of this, but if I'm not mistaken, they actually tried Germany and then withdrew.
Huh.
I actually think you ought to look that up, given your heritage. But
I would definitely Germany. I don't know if
I
they.
I I
I
seem
know
to
we don't have any Walmarts in
yeah I
Germany.
seem to remember they did come in, tried to set up, and they just couldn't apply their model, and it may be because of those labor practices.
And standards.
It may be because of labor standards, the supervisory boards, all that. They may have just concluded that it was too disruptive of their business model. I think they tried Germany and then withdrew.
I'll have to look it up. That's interesting because now, knowing from you what you said about the standards and that Walmart has to acquire to put their businesses into places, it would make sense that Germany might not like it, might not like that.
Right.
All right, the last one will be: have you seen the
No, I haven't seen
Walmart?
the movie.
You have
I
not
haven't
seen the
seen the
movie.
movie. I should go see it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's actually good movie. Thank you so much for the interview.
Okay. I
And
hope it's
that'll be
helpful.
it. I'm sure. My gosh, this is saving us really.